Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of the Team Deakins Podcast, a collection of informal conversations between Roger and James Deakins and a guest. We never know where the conversation will take us, so listen in and see where it goes. This episode is sponsored by Aperture, a premier manufacturer of LED lighting with the industry's greatest variety of fixtures for your complete lighting needs. Aperture recently announced the new Storm family of lights. With LED white light quality that matches natural daylight and classic tungsten bulbs, plus extreme low-end dimming while maintaining color quality. Discover more about the new Storm lights and the complete Aperture lighting ecosystem at aperture.com. Today, we're speaking with a playwright and television writer. Her television work includes The Secret Diary of a Call Girl, Succession, and I Hate Suzie. We're pleased to welcome Lucy Prebble. Lucy, thank you for doing this.
Yeah, great to see you.
It's a pleasure. Nice to see you, Roger. Nice to see you, James. Thank you.
We'd love to start with our first question, which is always, how did you get to where you are today? Were you a kid that was writing plays all the time and putting on a show? Or was this something you found later that you wanted to be a dentist and then you found you wanted to write? What's your story?
Well, I always think that writers are generally one of two camps. They are often like actors who don't get a good enough part and end up writing one themselves. And some of the greatest writers of all time are that. You know, Shakespeare, I think, Chekhov. There's
Charles
another
Dickens.
kind of, yeah, right, absolutely. And I think there's another kind of writer who is just would write anything, you know, would write novels or plays or television. And I definitely fall into that latter group. I was always writing as a kid, like diaries and bad poetry and all those sorts of things, quite privately though. It was all very private, my writing, and sort of in a shoebox under the bed. But I wasn't particularly interested in showing it to anyone or performing or anything like that. So it was more about how you process things, I suppose. And so I would say I was more in that camp. And I was also surrounded by books. I was very bookish. So reading was everything to me growing up. Like, I wasn't sporty. I found group activities sometimes a little bit hard. And what I really wanted to do was read and watch television, but particularly read. And I think I was very intimate with words from a very young age. And that's sort of how I still feel, really.
So you liked doing this. Did you go to university? Did you study writing?
No, I didn't study writing.
Did that help?
I went to university and I studied English literature. So obviously, I suppose I did study writing, but other people's. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, really. I didn't come from an artistic family, particularly. My mum worked in education. My dad was in business. I didn't have any models of seeing that there was a way to make a living in this industry. So I hadn't ever really imagined it. And then when I was at university, it really was about making friends. There were groups of people there who were more quite charismatic and fun, and they sort of all wanted to be actors or work in the industry. And I think I thought there was a usefulness in me being able to write at that point. Now, I didn't know I could write, but I just remember that at one point they wanted to take a play to a festival. And this is when we were sort of in our very early 20s. And it was this group of friends who I really wanted to be in with. And I remember them having a conversation about how this festival was called the National Student Drama Festival. It's like a sort of very small version of the Edinburgh Festival, particularly for theatre. and they wanted to take a play, but they knew that you only got into this festival if it was a contemporary play, because the festival was tired of seeing like 20-year-olds play King Lear. You know, they wanted like fresh stuff. And I remember overhearing that conversation and thinking, oh, maybe I could write something then that they would want to be in. So there was looking back, there was like a social impetus to it. And I said to them, oh, I write, which was quite an odd thing for me to say, because I hadn't really shown anyone anything I'd written ever. And so I sort of said I would try and write them a play to be in. And that's what I went away and did. And it was a not very good play, but they were in it and they did take it to this festival. And I did sort of get the thing I wanted, I suppose, which was to be part of this group. And I have a suspicion that that might have been a sort of driving force throughout all of this professionally, is to sort of be in an environment with people working together on something that you who you want to be around.
Yeah. So you wrote that play, and did that say to you, oh, I can write?
No.
Maybe I'll do this for real?
No, I mean, I still wasn't really in a place where I believed that that was a career option. It was more a sort of student activity. And then what happened is, when we went to this festival, I saw that there were other people who did believe that. And that affected me. But the biggest thing that happened to me really was the years after I left university. I did a lot of secretarial work, and I was working in lots of different industries, in lots of different places, from factories to offices, you know, to like the NHS, to loads of different places. And then eventually I got a job in a theatre doing administrative work, because I had quite a lot of secretarial experience. And it was that changed everything for me. It was being in a place that made plays, and seeing it behind the scenes. And that just provided me with the reality that people did do this for a living. And crucially, it was sometimes not good until it was good. And I think that had a huge effect on my belief that there was a professional world there that I could be part of. But secondly, confidence-wise, I'd always assumed that everyone who worked in this industry was just brilliant and amazing. And rather than like the fact that you just work really hard and you learn lots of stuff, because I think the arts has been for a very long time in love with the sort of idea of genius, and I guess a lot of industries are, but particularly ours has this kind of like is in love with the idea of some people are just these geniuses. And I think the idea that you spend years and years getting better and learning things, and something works and something doesn't, isn't so exciting. It's not so like compelling to write about. And what happened to me working at a theatre in an administrative capacity was seeing that over and over again, seeing really talented people doing work that was flawed, and then they were panicking about, and then they managed to pull out of the bag at the last minute, and seeing early drafts come in of plays which were going across my desk, but only in a secretarial capacity, only to give to the artistic director. But I was reading them and I was going, oh God, this is like quite messy at points. And it's one of the greatest playwrights who's living today. And of course it was like, it's an early draft. And then it got to be amazing. But you don't have access to that at all when you're just, I don't know, like a reader or an audience member. You assume that everything arrives at its final point in a way. And that was defining for me. Then I was like, okay, I'm going to try and write something, like properly write something.
But were you always writing when you were a secretary, working as a secretary?
Did you go home at night and write?
Did you continue writing?
Yeah, I always wrote privately. That was an era where you were moving away from the diary into the blog, you know, onto the online world. And I did quite a bit of that. And also I started to take a course. This was around the time that I was doing secretarial work. I started to take a once a month course at the Royal Court, I think it was at the time, or maybe it was once every 2 weeks. where you went in for 3 hours, and it's called like the Young Writers Group, and you sort of talk about writing, and crucially you get set the task of, by the end of the course, writing a play. And that was something that I did, and that also changed everything. The idea of a deadline, which I know everyone knows, but actually until somebody said to you, you have to deliver this, and you have to by this date, it's very easy to never show anyone anything. So that was defining.
Can I ask, how did you get onto that course? Was it?
It was advertised. It was one of the things that when I left uni, so I was at Sheffield, and after the English literature course, some of the other students who I was with, I know had applied for it. And so I kept an eye on it each year. And I think I applied for it 2 years after I left university. I can't remember, and it was full up. And this is weird. I rang them and I said, I know you're full up, but is there any way like you would reconsider? Which is really strange because I don't remember the version of me that did that, but I know I did that. Right. It's one of those really weird things. And they said, no, we're full up in your age group, but we do have the possibility of a space on the like 16 to 19-year-old group, because that had been applied for.
Enrolled.
Yeah. And I said, well, would you let me go on that? Again, I don't really remember the interior feeling of doing that, but I know I did it. So I must have been very passionate and ambitious about it at the time. And they said, yeah, okay, if you want to. And I remember going to this group and feeling a bit like, like in the story, like The Ugly Duckling, where, they're all they all look the same except one of them, because it turns out. And I remember sitting there feeling physically much bigger than everyone else and being like, oh, this is awkward. I shouldn't have done this. It feels weird. It feels like being like the creepy person at the young person's thing. I think that was weird. But in retrospect, I'm really glad I did. I'm really glad that younger version of myself seems to have had that level of aggression.
Drive, yeah.
And it's funny, as you get older, I don't know, everyone's different, but as I get older, I feel like I have less and less of that. And I really appreciate my younger self having that. It's true when I read my old writing as well. There's a lot of, it feels very ballsy and quite aggressive in a way that is just, I don't feel anymore now. I feel much less sure of myself and sort of uncertain. So that's really interesting.
I'm surprised you say that. I'm just thinking of some of the things we've seen, we'll get to later, of your television work. It seems quite ballsy to me. But...
Thank you. So did the course help a lot? And do you feel that you can teach writing? Can you learn writing?
Or is it just practice? Is it just doing it? Is it all those days as a kid writing and putting it under your bed, hiding it?
That's so interesting as a question. Because sometimes I'm asked now to teach writing and I really don't know what to say, because I want to do it and to I think it's really important to do that and to give back or whatever, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I also feel very intimidated by doing it because, as you say, it's hard to know what you're really teaching. I think there were a couple of things, literally practical things that I learned. One was the idea in theatre of actioning, which was a very big royal court thing, which was this notion that when you look through a script, you should be able to look at every line. And it's more for actors, really, but it was really helpful to me as a writer, and know what the action, i.e. the verb underneath it is, and particularly in theatre, what that person's doing to the other character. So, for example, the obvious ones would be manipulate, seduce, bully, deceive, any transitive verb, any verb that basically is doing something to another character. And that if you can't find that action underneath a line, you should think very hard about why that line is there. And that's a really practical thing that was on this course. And I've used that through my entire life and career. I found that incredibly helpful, because so much writing, especially when you're young, is about display. It can be about showing what you can do writing wise, and actually the characters aren't doing anything. And when you work with actors, you start to learn that actually that doesn't work. You can't just have them saying clever things that you want them to say. But as a young writer, you desperately want them to say clever things that you've written. But really, if it's not actioned, it's nothing. So that was a really hugely practical thing that I've always used and loved. But yeah, I think honestly, if you can't write dialogue, you can't write dialogue. I think you can learn structure, and I think you can learn story and really get it in your bones. But I think probably if you don't have an ear for how people talk, you're going to struggle. Like, that's a hard thing to learn if it doesn't come naturally to you, I think.
Is it also that you need to be able to get into other people's heads, be observant enough, not to be going through your life just with your own concerns in it, but if you're writing something, you have to be able to describe a character who might be completely different than you, but you've got to have had that kind of empathy to understand why he or she is doing what they're doing?
Yeah, I guess that's absolutely right, James. I mean, yeah, I think you do. It never occurred to me that other people didn't have that. I think
they don't.
Quite a few, we won't go into names, but there's quite a few don't seem to have any empathy at all. But let's go somewhere else.
But I also think there can be a version of that at the other end of the spectrum, which I think actors, writers, and artists in general sometimes have, which is if you were brought up in a situation for whatever reason where you had to work quite hard to understand why someone else was behaving like they were behaving, and to get in their point of view a lot, I think that can lead to that sort of writer's mindset, artist mindset, where you spend a lot of your brain develops trying to preempt or work out why someone is behaving like they're behaving, and to protect against it sometimes, or to like solve it. And I think that can often be the case with people who go into this industry, but writing in particular, sometimes that thing of you were thinking in someone else's brain when you were quite young. And I think then you sort of have this ability to do that across the board, which sometimes can be not necessarily good. It can be like hypervigilance. It can be like worrying about what someone else is thinking when really it's not your business what they're thinking, you know?
And I think also the most interesting pieces are when you're following a character and a character does something completely unexpected that you didn't see coming, and you've been in that character's head, but you believe that they would do that.
Yeah.
And I never know how it is the writer comes up with that, but it makes sense, but I wouldn't have seen it.
That's the dream.
And that's when it's interesting.
Yeah, that's as you say, like when perfection strikes, it's the same as the structure of a joke, really. It's the same as writing comedy, writing really, really great drama. Because in some ways, because you're reaching for exactly that. You're reaching for the punchline of a joke is something that feels totally inevitable, but you are totally surprised by at the same time. And the great character story also feels like that. Because if you, as you say, if they know what's coming, then they're sort of bored and resentful when it happens, the audience, I mean. And but if they don't know what's coming, but they go, but they wouldn't do that, then they're confused and resentful. Neither of those are good.
Yeah. So where did your ideas for your early plays come from?
And how did you get into actually writing plays?
So on this course that I did back at the Royal Court, I ended up trying to finish the play that I had written on that and sent it to the court itself, the theatre that runs the programme. And that was a play called The Sugar Syndrome. And it was a very small play about sort of early experience on the internet, really, where a young girl with an eating disorder meets a man who is basically a paedophile, and they meet up, and it's about a sort of unlikely friendship that is both sort of horrible and for a short while kind of interesting. And that was that came out of, and a lot of my stuff I've written, I think, it came out of a feeling that there was something going on around me in the world that wasn't being talked about, and yet was feeling quite important and destabilizing. And I think a lot of the things I've ended up writing about are a way of saying something that feels like it's everywhere, but no one's talking about. And back then, I think that's what it felt like about early online experience, like people connecting who maybe it was unhealthy to connect, or that there was just a sort of shadow world, I suppose. And I was interested in the way that like sex and food are both like these very essential biological urges that get very corrupted by just experiences that you have in the world. And so it sort of came from that place. But I don't know, I think also there's a little bit of me that knows when something is on the edge of acceptable and a bit daring. And I'm drawn towards that in my writing as well. But that's really what it felt like. It felt like this is the sort of contemporary thing that I feel around me. And there's no theatre about it. There's no art about it. There's no everyone I know at that stage from the age of about 15 was online in forums talking to people. And it's like, but theatre doesn't care about that. Theatre just wants to put on old plays, and film even is not interested in that. Film is interested in, big action and stuff like that. And I think that feeling is very important to me when I'm writing something, that feeling of, wait, why is no one talking about this? And that really always gets me started. And that play actually got put on in their small studio theatre as part of a festival of like young writers' work. And that was really important for me, that feeling of like, oh my God, they put it on. And so from that point, I was writing in the evenings as well as doing like secretarial work. And then eventually I gave up the secretarial work eventually.
Oh, wow. Wow. So that was, it's interesting. We've not seen it as a play on stage, but read it. It's very disturbing.
Yeah.
And you you really feel kind of queasy about what you feel about the characters, because there's two different men that she's having a relationship with on the phone. And one is kind of, you think, is obviously wrong, but the other one seems a bit disturbing as well. It's very interesting. But that was successful as a play, was it? Against all the plays that people were doing that were revivals of whoever,
Well, I wouldn't say successful. Like, I don't think it worked completely. Like, I don't think it was. No. But I think some people saw enough in it, like just in the theatre, like in that place, to go, oh, let's encourage her. And I look at that now, and I find it very disturbing. But
you wrote it,
exactly. Right. But I think that's quite a normal experience.
You're a very disturbed person.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. I do. To sort of things from 20 years ago, you do feel like a different person. But it didn't really work. But something I feel very passionately about theatre is, there was a good 10, 15 year period where you were allowed to do that. You were allowed to experiment quite a lot in studio spaces. So that was like a 85 person theatre that was on it. And you get to sit there with an audience watching something you've written, which is, I think, to go back to your question earlier about teaching, the only way you really learn. And you don't learn anywhere faster than theatre. Because you are sat there with people literally around you, like shoulder to shoulder, reacting in real time to your play. Like, you don't have any of that protection like that I get sometimes with telly now, where you're like, well, they said people have watched it, they said the viewership's good, but you're just sat at home watching it, if you even do watch your own thing. But in the theatre, the physical nature of the shame is so overwhelming that you're like, your learning curve is crazy. Like, you could have 2 plays on, and I think you will learn more about your own writing than you could do 10 years of telly. And it's and I really believe passionately that all, like the defunding of theatre, you know, in this country particularly, it's so short-sighted in terms of writers for other industries, because actually that's where they've sometimes learned the craft. I mean, it depends, doesn't it? Soaps are another great way of doing it, you know, in TV, but in theatre, like, so many writers came from a world where they had that experience of going to the loo in the interval of their own play and hearing through the cubicle doors what people really think and just throwing up, because they don't know who you are. You're a writer. They don't recognise you. They don't know. So you hear everything and you just go like, right, I am never gonna bore people like that again, or indulge myself like that, or whatever it is, whatever section of the play made you just go like, make it stop, make it stop, make it stop. You know, you learn really fast, and that I'm grateful for.
And in theater, is the writer more involved? Is the writer there during the rehearsals and has a say if they want to change lines or something? I mean, I know on film it can veer way off, and it makes sense to me, but then I've done a lot of film. But in theater, it seemed like the writer had more of a position in the production. Is that right or wrong?
Well, I would guess so. I haven't worked in film really in the capacity that you guys have. Obviously, that you guys have. Like, it's something I would love to do, but I've never got anything made. You know, I've sort of attempted a couple of screenplays that didn't make it, and I've been approached for rewrites for bigger projects that I have found the process to be too grueling to do. So I don't know, but I would say that in theatre there is a greater respect for the writer probably than traditionally I'm led to understand from film. But I don't know how true that is. Roger, you could probably speak a lot more to that. But I think in theatre, yes, you can be there for the whole rehearsal if you want. I tend to want to be there for the first bit and the last bit. I think it's important to leave the middle bit for people to express and find their own way, actors and directors. There's also something a little bit controlling about a writer in theatre sitting by the director the whole time, because the actors ask the director questions, but then you can feel them actually looking at you, like, well, you wrote it. And I think there's actually quite an interesting, like, parental relationship as writer and director in theatre. I always feel that you're quite maternal as a writer. Whether you're, like, female or male, it's sort of not about gender. It's more that you create the thing originally. And then at the very beginning, the thing needs you quite a lot. And then there's a really important stage where it's really important for you to separate from the piece or the baby. Like, and for it to sort of have its own sense of self. And at that point, it's actually really important that the director steps in a quite a paternal way, I think, and go like, you know, go on, get on the bike, ride off, do what you've got to do. And so I actually try and move away for a little bit of the play, because otherwise you're always wanting to give the answer, like, which is nonsense. There's no such thing, obviously. But when the actor goes like, do I know about what she did 2 years ago or whatever, there's a part of you that wants to go like, oh no, you definitely don't know. No. And it's like, that actually doesn't necessarily always help the actor. That's not always the right answer. And they need to build it themselves. So, but yes, I think respect-wise in theatre, you get a lot of sort of, for better and worse, you get a lot of bowing down a bit. And in film, I think for better and worse, it's much more pragmatic. And there's something about that I quite like, actually. TV has a bit of that as well.
Yeah, well, doesn't the writer have more say in TV than in film?
Seemingly, for sure. I mean, as you know, my partner is someone who's a film writer, and he can't believe the amount of say that television writers get. It's just like infuriating. And there is that is quite an American thing, though. It's worth saying that, like, not in every other country is there that sort of show running tradition where on an American TV set, if the showrunner walks up behind the director and sort of says, I don't really think that would be there in the room. Everything gets changed. The prop gets taken away and everything gets changed, and that would not happen in any other. As you imagine that happening on a film, like the director would be like, "What are you even doing here? Get off set."
We talked to a South American director who. A wonderful film director, but he does a lot of American TV series, and he says it's great because he just walks in and everybody's doing what they do, and the showrunner's doing it, and it's fine because he can make a living in between doing what he really wants to do, which is films in South America, which I think is really cute.
I think that's great. Also, what a great attitude. That's exactly the sort of director you want for a TV show as well. Like, there's nothing worse than the opposite, which is like when a film director comes onto a TV set, as he says really smartly, like when, let's say, the actors have been doing it for 4 years and they all know each other really well and they know their characters really well, and then a new director comes on and sort of walks up and goes, "I don't think your character would do that," and then you just see the eyes of this actor going like, "Sorry, what? You don't think I would do that?" And it's like, well, this is not going anywhere good. This is
But do you think it's also a function of the fact that TV sort of just keeps continuing the story? When you're doing a movie, you have a beginning and an end normally, but when you start, but with TV, you're sort of going on and on. So you kind of need the writer to be in the process to go, "Oh, they're doing that now? I guess then it can't end this way. We're going to have to change." So do you think that it's just a function of what television is that the writer needs to be more involved?
That's a great point. I don't know. Maybe. And maybe if I was being really cynical, I would say that I would say that, well, perhaps if you're in an industry where what they need is the writer to write more, then you might give that person a level of power because your business model depends upon it. So the idea that like, well, listen, we'd better put the showrunner up in a nice hotel and we'd better give the showrunner the final say because we want a season 3. That feels to me like a business choice as well. Whereas the truth about movies is, I mean, both you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like, once that writer's written the script, you could sort of run off and go, right, let's just do whatever we want because we don't need them anymore, ostensibly.
Well, and also in fairness, it's because there's also the time where we're talking about it and sort of going off of that and saying, "Oh, well, wait, this could happen." And then you bring actors in and the actors say it in a different way and you go, "Oh." So there is an evolution that continues into the cutting room because here's a new person, the editor who hasn't been on the set normally and sees it completely differently. So to me, it's
cuts out all your best scenes.
It's
said joking.
It's making a better piece of work.
Yeah, it evolves, doesn't it?
Yeah,
in that way. But again, it's not needing to add time to it. Normally, it needs to pull time out.
Yeah.
So
but I would argue, like, I would argue that a really great writer would know that. And not be tied to the script, because I don't work like writers who hand over the script and then leave it alone. I do tend much more towards the showrunner model when I work, and that's because I love all of that process in the same way that you guys are talking about. Like, I actively love mostly when an actor makes me see something in a new way. And I particularly love the edit. Like what you're describing, I love the edit. The edit feels to me like the chance to write it again. And with, as you say, the eyes of a great storyteller who hasn't necessarily seen much of it beforehand. And like that. And I personally am not the sort of writer who wants everything to be done as I've written it, I would much rather be surprised and see something elevated and occasionally even changed quite a lot. I love cutting. Cutting is my absolute favorite thing, to the point where actors in theatre hate me when they see me approaching, because they're all like, oh, Lucy Scissors is coming over, because all I can see is like how much we could get out of it.
Scissors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that in the edit, when you can when you can take a whole thing out and go, oh my God, we didn't need that at all. That's amazing, you know.
Well, I'm really interested, and I want to talk about Enron, which as a play, I haven't seen as a play, but I love reading.
Oh,
I just think it's kind of wonderful, and it's the best explanation I've read of that whole world and what happened.
Oh, thank you.
And I want to know where that came from, and I want to know about the evolution of the play, because as it's written, there's all these wonderful techniques of people talking to the camera and, you know,
the audience, not
the audience. Sorry, yes, but it could be the camera.
Wrong.
But there's always all these different techniques. I mean, how did that evolve? Was it just written like that, and is that how it was performed on stage, or did you rewrite it as it was being
Oh no,
rehearsed?
it was written like that from the start, but I also did some rewriting of it during the. I always do. Like I'm always rewriting in rehearsal, and particularly in previews, because when an audience arrives, you have this incredible period of time where you just have this eye on whether something's working or not. So I change a lot of stuff during previews, which is obviously very difficult for the actors, but it always produces a better show. So Enron was a play that I wrote in like 2007, 2008, about the fall of an American energy company. And I remember basically the news around that time. It was in the news because it felt like a huge deal at the time. I'm sure you kind of remember. It wasn't just financial news. It felt like it was headline news at the time because of the size of the collapse of the company. And I remember just sort of seeing articles almost in my peripheral vision about it. And then I read one and I just thought, this is so dramatic, because the article I read was about Andy Fastow, who was the chief financial officer at Enron, and he'd basically decided to testify against his old CEO, Jeffrey Skilling. So he'd been persuaded to basically like testify against him, to say all of the fraud at Enron, which had caused the collapse of the company, was really Jeff Skilling's idea, and he had only carried it out, but he hadn't wanted to do it. And it was sort of fascinating because actually Fastow was a willing pupil of Skilling's. And in this article, it was talking about how he was kind of obsessed with him and loved him and sort of thought about him as a real icon. And when you read that, you're like, well, this is like a Greek tragedy, or this is like the Sorcerer's Apprentice or something, like this guy who Skilling hires and gives all this dirty work to do in the company, and then eventually turns on him and says, no, Governor, it wasn't me, it was him. Like this breakdown of this love bromance between these two corporate men. And I just thought, wow, I remember reading it and thinking, that is a really like alive story about business. Whereas most business is like, oh, yawn, 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 I don't understand the financial pages. So it stayed with me. And then when I left university, so it was happening around the same time, this was maybe, I can't remember what year, but I left university and I couldn't believe how many graduates went to go and work for big consultancy firms. And what I hadn't realised is we'd all studied like English literature and history and geography. And then what happens in your final year at university, I don't know if it's the same in America, but you basically have these like recruitment fairs where big companies turn up and try and like encourage the best or the brightest graduates or whatever to come and work for them at, I don't know, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Accenture, all the big law firms. And I remember just seeing everyone get funneled into this like business track. And it didn't really matter what their subject was or what they claimed to have been interested in politically. It was more like you just go and get a job that pays you money in the city, and that's what you do. And I remember just finding that so shocking. And it was a combination of that feeling of, oh, nobody actually stops and thinks about what they want to do. Like they sort of just do what's expected of them. And that could have included me. I'm not saying I was like apart from that, but I didn't end up doing that. I was probably just more uncertain about what I wanted to do for a living, but I didn't take that path. But I did think that's weird. Like, I couldn't even tell you what consultancy was at that point. Like, and yet people were like committing their lives to it. And there was something about that combined with remembering that story about Enron that made me think it was one of those things, like we talked about earlier, that was happening everywhere. And nobody was talking about it. Nobody then. It's hard to remember that now, post-financial crisis, but nobody was talking about business or finance or anything like that. It was just this huge, like, black box of what a lot of people did for a living, and nobody else really understood what it was, and that was fine. And so I really got excited about I met with a theatre company at one point, quite a small theatre company called Headlong at the time. They used to be the Oxford Stage Company, just a small touring company. And they were looking for writers, and I was looking to write some theatre. And they said, we're looking for people with big ideas for big stages, because if you tour around England, you need to fill big stages because all of the repertory theatres are really big. And they said, so have you got any ideas that could fill a big stage? And I said, well, I've got this one idea, but it's mad and you probably won't want to do it. But it's a musical about the fall of the energy company Enron. And there was this pause. And then Ben Power, who was basically the guy who was running, the literary manager at Headlong at the time, there was this pause and he went, that's exactly the sort of thing we want to do. And it was that positivity and enthusiasm that meant I went away and I started trying to write it. And I also knew from all of these undergraduates that I knew who'd gone and like started to work for these places that what they do is they basically pump you full of the idea that what you're doing is very glamorous. So if you work in banking or you work in consultancy, there's this huge effort to make you feel like you're doing something really exciting and glamorous. And I almost think that in every industry, there is like a sort of inverse proportion of like how interesting and glamorous your job actually is and what it's made to seem like. So they would invite like Cirque du Soleil to come and do like their parties at Arthur Andersen and Enron and these sorts of places, because you want it to feel like this heady, glamorous, crazy place when all you're doing is numbers. Whereas as you guys know very well, like often in show business, if you were to go and see something being filmed, it's like really, really famous people in Ugg boots in a caravan using an outside toilet, isn't it? Like it's like the opposite.
Right.
Yeah. And I just found that dichotomy so interesting. And that's why I thought like you should do something that shows that side of it, like the jazz hands of it. Of how business sells itself, and so by putting that form and that content together, I thought this will be quite an exciting show, and it'll either fail spectacularly or it'll succeed. And the irony is, it did both. It actually did succeed, and then it failed spectacularly.
Oh, really?
Well, on Broadway, it was a huge flop. It was one of the biggest flops on Broadway of all time, and it was a huge success in the West End.
Congratulations!
Thank you. I'm very proud.
I'm really interested in the techniques of having people talk to the audience and the raptors that appear in Fausto, the accountant's office, and things like that. Because you use similar techniques when you did A Very Expensive Poison, which is about the poisoning of the Russian. And then you used them again when you did for television with Billy Piper, Diary of a Call Girl. And I find it really interesting that you took these techniques from theatre into television, and they're rarely used in film. But to me, when I read Enron or A Very Expensive Poison, I find I'm reading something quite filmic, whatever that means. You know?
Really? That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's
I'd like to see it, because I've always been a fan of films that push the kind of wall sometimes, the fourth wall. There's a wonderful film by Peter Watkin, I don't know if you've seen it, about the Battle of Culloden.
No.
And it's like a reconstruction of the battle, shot in black and white, 16mm from the BBC, like 1965. but he introduces a modern day journalist into the battlefield. So this journalist is talking to the camera, explaining what's going on, because otherwise you'd have no idea. But it's really interesting. It doesn't take you out of it. It draws you into this terrible, terrible conflict and the aftermath. It's a quite brilliant film if you've never seen it.
Oh, I'd love to see that.
I wonder where those ideas come from and how you felt about transitioning them into television.
It's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting you connected them, because I don't tend to connect them. I think of the theatre ones and the TV one have been quite different. But now you've said that, I see it, of course. No, in theatre, it came from a really distinct place for me, which was my experience as an audience member in the theatre is I find it quite rude when the lights go down and then the actors just pretend like no one's there. Like I experience that as like, oh, okay. So you guys are going to have a great time and we're going to sit in these uncomfortable seats silently, like, and I think there's something about theatre sometimes when it does that can feel like like the people doing the play are having a better time than you are as an audience. And I've always fought against that. Like I always feel a bit more like an audience member than I do a on stage person, I think, as a theatre writer. So I'm always thinking, how can I make, like, I think speaking directly to the audience in a way that like a Shakespeare play does, which was hugely impactful on me when I started seeing them as a young person. That feels to me like the right thing to do. Like let's not pretend we're not in the room together. We are. And I actually really appreciate you being there. And I want to share with you what I'm feeling and thinking and what the characters are sort of doing. And so I love it when and also a big influence on me was stand-up. Like I was much more into comedy than theatre growing up. So that thing of going somewhere and someone talking to the audience felt to me like a more natural way of using the stage. And also, of course, like the Shakespearean soliloquy. So that always felt to me like I relaxed as soon as I felt I was allowed to do that. I was like, oh, great. And it makes you be more formally inventive as well, because you're not buying into this thing of the fourth wall. And therefore you sort of have to do everything very naturalistically and in this Aristotelian way of real time. And as soon as you break that, it's like something happens in your head where you go, well, maybe I can do anything. Like, what if I just did this thing? What if someone just started singing for no reason? And then suddenly in theatre particularly, I feel like the audience goes, oh my God, yeah, you can do anything. How exciting. And they start to get excited too, rather than that kind of, that sat back in the dark, neutral kind of like, I'm not really here. I'm going to wait for it to be over and I'm going to politely applaud, which always feels to me a bit depressing.
And passive.
Very passive. Yeah. And so that to me was a huge light bulb moment of, I think my style is like this. And it's a bit vaudevillian and a bit embarrassingly direct, but I do think that's my style, and just to accept it. But when it came to Secret Diary, that came from a really specific filmic inspiration, which was, I had a similarly profound experience when I saw Alfie with Michael Caine. And I remember watching that movie, probably my late teens, early 20s, and being like, oh my God, you're allowed to do this. Again, that same feeling. And also and I think there was always part of me that wondered if you could make a female Alfie, like, would it be possible for a woman to sort of tell a story like that? And that was always at the back of my head. And then when I was employed to do Secret Diary, I think I thought that would be interesting. Could this be a bit like a female Alfie?
So how did that project come about then, the Secret Diary?
Well, that was a weird one, because it was maybe my first thing I ever got on the television. So I'd been trying to write television before that, but nothing had ever got made. And then I was quite online, and I was in the world of blogging, and I was reading a blog called Belle de Jour, which was this woman who claimed to be a high-class sex worker in London. And I really liked her writing. I thought it was very smart. And so I was following her blog and reading it. it was a weird, that era of the early 2000s where basically people were reading each other's diaries, and it felt kind of interesting as a writer. And I ended up going to a TV production company who I had worked with on another thing that hadn't got made, in my 20s. Like, basically, I was trying to make money by writing treatments for television shows that never got made. That's what was happening in my life. And then I brought them this and said, I really think there's a TV show in this. And then it turned out that they knew the people who had just bought the rights to her book, which was coming out imminently, based on the blog. So it was there was a lucky confluence of events. But what also happened very quickly was I just lost, I didn't have the level of experience to get that project right, and I lost all control over it, really. And the producers, basically, we were supposed to be with Channel 4, who were a very edgy channel at the time in the UK, and they ended up turning it down. And then the producers went straight to ITV, who were a much less edgy, much more commercial channel. And then ITV didn't want to do it, but they said, we're launching one of our first side channels called ITV2. And we want to do it on that, but we only want them to be half an hour long. And at that time I was writing hour longs. And and the producers were like, so that's great news. They think they want to do it. And I didn't think anything of that. But ITV2 was basically an even lighter version of ITV. And then I was cutting episodes down from 48 pages to 24 pages because they wanted a big commercial break. And I was a not experienced enough writer. And it ended up being something much, much less interesting than what I wanted it to be. And so that was quite a baptism of fire of you.
That's really interesting because we watched it and we felt it was trying too hard. The director was trying too hard to make it zany, but really the material underneath and the style of the character talking to the camera, it was so interesting.
Oh, that's
You
nice.
didn't need all this zany, throw the camera around stuff.
No.
So, it's really interesting to hear you say that.
There was a good show there at some point, potentially, but it never, ever, ever found its way anywhere near the screen.
That must be really just depressing, when it's your material.
I think what was hardest about that era was that I was partly responsible for it because I didn't know what I didn't know. So I didn't know that I could say no to things. I didn't know that it wasn't just, I thought I had to do everything the producers told me. And maybe I did because I didn't have any power at that time. I didn't have any reputation or anything. But in retrospect, I would. But also, second, it was a really politically difficult show because so many people had a really understandably strong reaction to it because it was, about a woman doing sex work, and it was sort of aggressively lightweight, and that's not who I am. I actually did a huge amount of research and spoke to a huge amount of women, and I care massively about sex workers and their representation. And sort of what happened is we got a lot of really heavy criticism and really and that felt really hard. That felt I've done, that thing sometimes where you make something and you go, I've done the very thing that I wanted to do the opposite of. I did this to do the opposite of what it is. I've made the very big same mistake that I hate, and that's really confusing.
But you must have been sort of reassured going have in the theatre both the effect and a very expensive poison come up, and both were quite successful, I imagine. I mean, they're both quite wonderful plays, I think, from what I read.
Thank you. I love them. Yeah, those are two I'm very proud of. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
was it
returned.
again? Well,
sorry, Richard. I was just going to say, I returned to theatre after that because I felt quite burned. And I did find a home there that I'm really grateful for. Yeah.
It must have been a very different experience working with John Crowley, who we work with.
Just such a wonderful
on a very
man.
expensive poison, and especially something with all those kind of we were talking about different stylizations. You've got Putin up in the in the audience talking, And then you've got a musical interlude where this Russian character Boris tells the audience, sings to the audience what polonium is or something, or radioactivity.
Yeah.
So I just find it's wonderfully imaginative, and the presentation of something that could be quite flat and dull and kind of expositional
Absolutely
becomes really alive. Yeah,
that was always my intention. Like, I feel so passionately that some of the most important stories of our time are not told because it's feared that they're boring. And I like Enron being an example of that, like the financial collapse. And I think one of the big reasons that there was no consequence, or hardly any consequence, to the financial crisis is partly because the culture doesn't translate it honestly to real people, and so it just sort of dissipates into nothing, and there's no sense of outrage as there should be, or not as much as there should be, because that story doesn't end up being successfully told. So it's something I feel hugely passionate about, and I felt that massively about the murder of Alexander Litvinenko. You know, that play was put on in 2019 before the invasion of Ukraine. You know, before this understanding finally of who Putin is and what he actually wants. And it was so clear from that murder. But again, it was sort of like not really conveyed and hushed up a bit in British terms because there was so much Russian money coming in. So to me, it's like vitally important that we tell those stories, and that they are not just entertaining, but moving as well, so that people kind of like take them in. And that's something I just feel like, with every bone in my body, really passionate about. But I also really believe that every story should be told as in the form that it's in, like with as much of that form as it can handle. So, for example, in A Very Expensive Poison, Putin is a character who sits in the royal box of the theatre, commenting wryly on events and basically trying to alter your view of the narrative. And that is obviously, it's like a metaphor for what leaders do online now, to be honest, but everywhere. But Putin particularly, with Russian propaganda at the time. But also, it's a great use of a theatre. And I think, again, one of my great frustrations with stage was you go into a space, you sit in it, and then they show you a sort of behind the fourth wall, naturalistic depiction of a living room. And you go, well, I could watch this in a film better because it would be an actual living room, you know? And I'm not saying plays shouldn't be set in living rooms, but I think if you've got royal boxes and they're never used in these red and gold theatres, and then you go in and you're making a Victorian red and gold theatre look like a 1990s living room, it's like, what are we doing here, guys? Like, maybe we should be using the space creatively for the space that it is.
Yeah.
And I just didn't think there was enough of that going on.
And it's also sort of taking a leap in imagination and giving the audience enough credit to be able to follow with it. You don't have to make a living room. You just do what you want and they'll follow with you. And I think that it's a good thing for the audience.
Has anybody tried to make it as a film?
No, I never. No, and that might be because there's such a needy theatricality to it. Like, I think people might look at it and go, oh, but that did happen with Enron, and that was a really interesting experience because I got asked to write a screenplay version of Enron, and the producers who were sort of Hollywood producers, they kind of took me aside after the first draft and said, film is really different from theatre. You can't do this in film. You need to think what the filmic version of these scenes are. And don't get me, I was changing it, but what I wanted it to be is like a version of All That Jazz, but in finance. And that's what I was trying to write. And they sort of said, no, like it needs to, they wanted it to be like Margin Call or something. To have sort of men in a room speaking like naturalistically about what was happening. And I just got so thrown by that because I thought, that was the opposite of why I wrote it, if you see what I mean. And so I got really lost, and eventually the project collapsed. And then 18 months later, Adam McKay brought out, what was that great movie? The Big Short, that's what it was.
Oh,
he,
the big
yeah. He made The Big Short, which had a lot of like direct-to-camera address and loads of like metaphorical, playful things about finance. And I remember thinking like, oh, that's annoying. Because I would have wanted to do something like that.
Well, you can do it. I mean, you could look back to sort of Cabaret or something and see the sort of mix of, you know, talking to the camera and the film audience. But
probably what we need now, something different.
Well, I just think it's very kind of blinkered to think. But it's interesting. So you've written on the series Succession.
Yeah.
Right. Which is, it's about a similar kind of, you know, it's about the Murdoch family, basically, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, but then that is very traditional, in a sense, it's very traditional television, isn't it? I mean, it's a sort of linear narrative, you know?
Yeah. I think Jesse approached me for that originally at the very beginning because he knew I'd done quite a lot of research and work on American corporate stuff for Enron. And so he approached me for that, and I think he'd looked at my writing and liked it, and so I came on board, you know, originally at the very beginning, and then was writing and execing on it the whole way through. And but I think that was ultimately like Jesse's the showrunner, and his taste, I think he wanted it to be very real and moving and have that capacity, as well as very funny. And I think that's enough to try and achieve without adding like formal experimentation to it. But I learned so much from doing that as well. That was really going to school on story and long-term story.
And how did that work out? Were there other writers? Did you work with other writers? Were you responsible just for an episode and somebody else did another episode? Did you have an outline of where everything was going? How do you work that out?
Well, every show is different, I suppose. But with Succession, what we would do is a very long room with anything between 6 to 10 writers. It varied season to season, but there were a core group of writers who always remained. And the room would last for maybe 4 months, and maybe even longer, actually, sometimes, of really intense storylining of the whole season overall, and then breaking down every episode very specifically. And we spent a lot of time doing that. We would start talking about characters, but also things in the news, and then it would evolve over time. So there was a richness to the show, I think, because of just the length of the writer's room. And then within the room, often a certain writer would be sent off to do a first draft of an episode. But over time, we evolved a process that worked very well by the end, which was that each episode went through certain writers and sometimes would be unrecognizable from its first draft by the time it hit the screen. Sometimes it would be reasonably close, but most of the time when it was close, it was because Jesse had done an early draft. So basically our process was long writers' rooms, and then a core of those writers would go on set for the whole of the shoot. And there would be 3 to 4 of us on set at any time and any day. And we would basically, like, Jesse would show run, but we would be helping rewrite episodes all the time. And different writers have different skills. So if an episode felt a little bit weak on something structurally, it might go to John Brown. Right. If a certain episode felt like it could do with some, you know, incredibly funny scenes and moments, Tony Roche might take a look at it. And then, you know, there were certain things that I was asked to look at. And then, you know, Jesse would always do the final pass. But by the end of season 4, there were basically a core group of, I would say, 5 of us who were doing that all the time on set every day.
Is it hard, though, to do that many seasons on the same project?
Not with that one, no, because it's one of those, like, annoyingly lovely experiences. I'm sure you've had them on movies, and sometimes they're not good. Sometimes they're not the good ones. Like, it's like you don't, you know, it doesn't always line up with the quality of something. Yeah, you can't tell. But honestly, like, it's sick making. But like, those guys now are my closest friends in the world. We hang out all the time. You know, we go to lunch together once a fortnight, and it's really like lovely. And the cast were pretty lovely, like really, really good people who were doing really good work. And so it was pretty much a joy to do. And it was sad when it ended.
I was just wanted to ask you, what is destiny? a first-person video game I heard you wrote.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I thought that was amusing. What is it? I've got no idea what they are because I've never watched any video games.
But Roger, I like the idea that you might just ask me, what is destiny? Like, that would be quite an existential question.
I should have left for a moment, shouldn't I? Yeah. Well, yeah, that's right. I could have got a really interesting answer to that. I should have thought of that.
Yeah, so I've always been a big gamer. Like, that's something I loved growing up. Yeah, I was basically books and games. So anything that was like a sort of a solitary experience, I wanted to do and hide in. And so I played a lot of video games growing up, and I loved them. And then I got an opportunity through. So by the time I was in my early 30s, I got an American agent because, you know, television was happening everywhere, and I think they were trying to like make money off me, basically, as agents want to do.
Yeah.
And he wrote to me and said, I'll tell you what it was. I wrote an article for The Observer, a newspaper here, about video games because I was asked to. I had mentioned in an interview that I'd given about a theatre play that I liked playing video games. And so weirdly, The Observer got in touch after that interview and said, would you write as a column about video games? Probably because they thought, you don't see a lot of sort of women playwrights who also play video games. And so I wrote this article about why I loved video games. And it went weirdly viral at the time. And I was like, and of course, then also you get a lot of stick because you're a woman writing about video games, and that at that time, like there was some pushback about that. So it got a fair bit of attention, and then my American agent, who must have seen it, wrote to me and said, I could get you work in video games. It just never occurred to me. And I was like, oh yeah, okay. Because it wouldn't have occurred to him. And he said, would you be interested? And I said, yeah, I'd be interested. So I ended up being flown out to Seattle to work on this video game that was honestly the biggest budget of anything I've ever worked on by far. I mean, bigger than any movie, bigger than big. I mean, seriously, like probably, certainly in the hundreds and hundreds of millions. There's no question.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And they, but of course it's a video game. So the passion is about the game design really. And sometimes for AAA games, AAA meaning the really big budget ones, they bring in writers from outside. And so I went in and it was fascinating. I mean, I probably can't say very much because of the NDAs I'm sure I signed, but but like it was like, again, just an amazing experience to see how things work at that level.
So when you're writing a video game, is it any video game, is it that you're working on different levels? Like if the player does this, then this should happen. But if they do this, then it has
giving
to
you options.
a separate story. Is that what you're doing?
No, not in a game of that level. So in a game of that level, because it's so huge, there are like sort of 20 writers or probably also other people who work in the game who are also writing, who are doing that stuff. What they look for in a game like that is like cutscenes. So the big scenes that play between gameplay. So you play a level and then it stops and it tells you a bit of the story when you're not playing. So they're scenes in that case. But that was a while ago as well. But really, James, you're right. Like if you're really writing a video game, what you're doing is you're working from very early on with the game designers to come up with a concept exactly as you would with a movie. And you're all working together to achieve that concept through narrative and through gameplay. And that's how, really great like indie games are made and stuff like that. But with a really, really big AAA game, you sort of, they're sometimes doing cutscenes just isolated from the rest of the game. So they're, being asked to just write those scenes.
So where do you see yourself going? I mean, we've actually seen you on Have I Got News for You, which is one of our favorite funny TV shows about
the English version, not the American version.
The English version is absolutely wonderful.
Oh, well, you've really done your research.
Where do you...
I know.
No, we watch it anyway.
Brought you way up in our
Especially when we're in England every night before we go to sleep, we watch watch Have I Got News
Great.
for You. Anyway, but where do you see yourself going? I mean, or where do you see where do you see storytelling going, really? How do you see your future and the future of storytelling? The kind of stories you want to tell, like you have in the theatre.
Well, I'm a bit frightened about that because I do think there is a terrifying possibility of AI being used to tell stories in a way that is going to threaten what we do for screen. And it's easy to say. Sometimes I do think to myself, well, it'll never replace true human creativity. And I also think audiences will sniff out the robot of it and not want it. But I don't know if I really think that. I don't know if that is true. I know what studios, and you know what studios can be like, or streamers can be like. And if they find that basically they can find a way to produce materials so much cheaper that's just as good, I just don't know that they won't do it. I just not sure I believe it. And I find that really frightening. And so in a strange way, I find myself drawn back towards where I started, which is theatre, because there's a reason that has lasted so many thousands of years, is that I think more than ever, people are going to really desperately want to be in a room with each other. And there are so few opportunities to do that. Like the cinema itself, people going to the cinema, that feels like sometimes an event film is making that happen, but then sometimes it's not. And I'm worried that we'll lose that and everyone will just start watching stuff on their phones. And so I think maybe I'll be drawn again back into theatre because everyone will want to be in the same room and they'll want to be around something live, that's not behind a screen and flattened and, done. And so I wonder if in a weird way that thing where I started will be kind of where I end up, because I know that it can't really ever be done by AI, or at least not in a non glib way. You could do hey, this we just wrote a play with AI, but I don't think that's ever going to actually be run for a long time.
No, I don't. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I'm kind of with you there. I think that would be really interesting because I think over my life I haven't gone to the theatre that much. But for the very reason you're saying, I think I would start going now, especially when you write another play and we hear that it's on somewhere.
Oh, thanks, Roger. I appreciate that.
We'll make the journey, I think.
I think there's some things you can do in plays that you can't do as easily in movies.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because we were talking about stylistically how you tell a story. I mean, do you feel that the theatre can tell that kind of story, a very expensive Poison, for instance, better than you could on television or the cinema?
I do, because I've seen people make television series about Alexander Litvinenko's poisoning, and it's exactly what you would expect it is. And that's not to say that's not good. But if you think about how much television is exactly what you expect it is, it's not as true in film as I know and have been responsible for some of the greatest examples of this, Roger. But I feel that film can sometimes surprise you and go, oh, wow, I haven't seen anything like this. And the form feels like it takes this leap forward. Also, that can happen. And in theatre, that can definitely happen. But there is this thing in television now where I feel like there is an AI quality to it almost before we're using AI, which is what that'll be. I'll pitch it to you and you go, oh yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I know exactly what that'll be. And people will watch it. They'll sit down and go, oh, that's another sort of murder mystery with two big stars in it for a stream. And they'll sort of go yeah, okay, let's watch that. I know what that'll be. And it is that. And that's fine. That's okay. But I'm so interested in what isn't that, and I think theatre feels to me like a place where I certainly feel more confident in knowing how to, or being able to do that. I also think there's such pleasure in seeing a human being do something real in front of you now as well. I think about dance and musicals and things like that. Just seeing human beings do things sort of in reality right in front of you, a bit like sport and why people love watching sport, I think is gonna become this like incredible spectacle, because we're getting less and less of it in the rest of our lives.
That's funny. I don't know what I was thinking about. I was thinking about going back to documentary filmmaking, where I sort of started out, really, I suppose.
Really?
I've always been uncomfortable that the filmmaker, the documentary filmmaker, is denying their presence, you know. And I've always liked documentaries where they own up to being there and they interact with the subject. And I think in a way it's much more truthful, because you're not saying this is absolute reality. This is a situation that we're bringing you. And that's why I loved Culloden, Peter Watkins Culloden, although it's a feature film, it's a film, but I love that interaction with somebody talking about what you're watching, you know. I think those devices can be really interesting, really interesting.
What documentary makers do you like who do that, Roger?
Not many, you know. I mean, most don't. That's the problem, you know.
Yeah, I love that too, and that reminds me a bit of what we were talking about earlier about plays, like why I use direct audience address, because it feels more honest to me. That you acknowledge the audience, and even as an actor, that you almost welcome the audience and go like, listen, we know this isn't real, but we're going to tell you a story. And I relax when that happens to me. And in the same way as you're talking about, if a documentary maker is hiding themselves and then sort of telling you a story in the edit suite, but not owning up to what they're trying to say, then I don't know whether or not to trust them.
Right.
Exactly.
Especially now.
Yeah, where everything feels like it's potentially dishonest or biased. I don't know if you've ever watched any of the, it's quite uncomfortable, but if you watched any of Nathan Fielder's stuff, like The Rehearsal or anything like that, he's just made a show called The Rehearsal. Well, season 2 is the one, I think, and it's sort of comedy, but it's not quite comedy. It's also him being a documentary maker, and basically it's this theory that he gets people to rehearse things that they want to do in their life, but he's present, he's helping them rehearse it, and it's really funny and also quite uncomfortable and interesting. And I would say that's the only thing I've seen on television recently that feels like it's pushing the form a little bit.
Oh, definitely.
Oh, great.
See that.
Good.
Yeah.
We got something to watch. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you for doing this, Lucy.
Thank you
this
for
has
talking
been great.
to us. This has been absolutely fascinating.
Oh, not at all. I'm really glad
good.
it's been okay.
And when have you got another play on?
No, I haven't.
You don't know yet?
I know. It's too early for me. I've been sort of working on other people's projects a bit, because I had a baby 18 months ago, and I found that finding the balance quite hard. So I think now I'm ready to start writing my own stuff again. So I'm just at the beginning of that. And I don't know if you guys ever feel this, but sometimes, like, when I'm just about to start something, I cannot remember how I've ever done it before. Like, it feels totally impossible that I ever wrote anything before.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
That feeling
Every
of just
film is a new experience. Yeah.
And so that's where I am right now. That amazing, very open feeling, but also terrifying of like, I've forgotten how to do this. I've completely forgotten.
Hey, I'm sure you'll find something and it'll be great.
Thank you.
So. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Lovely to see you.
Thank you for doing this.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
If you'd like to sponsor the Team Deakins podcast, let us know at pod@teamdeakins.com. Thanks for listening. If you want more information and further discussion, check out the forums at www.rogerdeakins.com. Becoming a member is free, and you can ask follow-up questions there. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more new questions and topics. Also, check us out on Instagram at team.deakins. See you next time.